clearly, Russia represents a proximate threat and a geopolitical adversary of sorts. But increasingly long-term, I think there's a perspective that China represents a greater long-term threat to freedom, to free enterprise, to human rights. We hope they won't go down that path, but they have taken some frightening turns. I'd like to ask each of you, to what extent do you believe NATO members that have been focused primarily on Europe, of course, given its history and its charter, but to what extent do NATO members recognize and seize the importance of the potential threat of China, a rising China? That'd be question one. And question two, I'll get them both out. And then question two is what would you do if you had the potential to do so? What would you do to strengthen NATO? What is the key to making NATO a more powerful alliance? And I say that in part because China will have a population many times our size down the road. They will have an economy much larger than ours, just given the fact that they have will have a much larger population. And for us to have the same economic might, the same capacity to build a impregnable military, will depend not just on us standing alone, but us standing with others whose population and economies we can share. So again, do our NATO allies recognize the significance of China as a threat? Are they taking action consistent with that? And then number two, what do we do to strengthen NATO as it faces these challenges? Dr. Donfried and then Mr. Brzezinski.
Thanks so much, Senator Romney. In many ways, this connects to the question Senator Cardin raised, which is, I'm not sure we would have democracy in Europe to the extent that we do were it not for NATO, were it not for U.S. engagement on the European continent. And the U.S. was very clearly trying to expand a liberal, small L international order at the end of World War II that was based on principles of liberal democracy, free market economy, rule of law, rights of the individual. And those values are essential to what NATO stands for. And we expect not only aspirants, the Georgias, Ukraines, Bosnias of the world, but also existing members to live up to those. And this is why I would argue all NATO allies agree with the U.S. that China poses a real challenge to the order that we constructed together at the end of World War II. The fact of the matter is that China barely registers on NATO's agenda today. And I would agree with you that NATO needs to grapple much more directly with what that rise of China means. We see it in terms of China going west with its Belt and Road Initiative, making strategic investments in European ports and European tunnels that clearly have affected political stances of particular European countries. So I do think there is increasingly a recognition in Europe about the challenge China poses. And we've seen that in recent European Union writings as well, and also in the fact that many European member states, along with the EU, have tightened up their review of Chinese strategic investment. So that's to your first question. To your second question of how can NATO become more powerful, I think for the U.S., it's about doubling down on this alliance. We, the U.S., are facing this challenge from a rising China, and I believe firmly that we are stronger for having democratic allies who are meeting this challenge with us. What is it that sets us apart from China and from Russia? It is precisely that we have allies. And so we should celebrate that and treasure it and work to enhance alliance cohesion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I would add, I'd agree with Karen that the European Union, our European allies, are becoming aware of the threat posed by China. You see this discussion over Huawei. You see the recent strategy document where they defined China as a competitor, which is pretty daring language for the European Union. And so Europe really is ready for a serious discussion with the United States on how it can collaborate to help shape the relationship the West has with a rising China. How to strengthen NATO? I agree that NATO was going to have to put China on its agenda. And we're beginning to see the first signs of that in the internal discussions going on within the alliance. As I mentioned in my testimony, what China is doing to the international rules-based order affects Europe just as much as it affects the United States. The good news is that some of our allies actually are already very active. They have a history in Asia. The British just had a naval exercise with the Japanese. The Norwegians regularly send some ships to RIMPAC exercises. That kind of activity is going to have to increase in the future as the two continents deal with this China. NATO also has a network of partnership agreements with countries in Asia Pacific, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. Those can serve as a foundation block, so to speak, for a more active allied NATO engagement in the region, which can be then a building block to a more coordinated political, military, and economic response by the West to China's rise.
Thank you. Thank you.